materials, the non-metal materials, we're talking 4 times the cost just from 6 months ago. So I would say that's something we can put off for a while. Let's see, on the short-term and ADUs, I'm kind of done with that. So y'all can argue about that till the cows come home. Let's see. My neighbor, he's got a bunch of kids, and hold on. He just bought 2 new puppies for his kids. He named them Timex and Rolex because, of course, they're watchdogs. And then, like a lot of people on this phone call, and no offense, but went to a business meeting the other day. It was a buffet, and we all agreed that we needed to go on a diet, but we all had so much on our plates. All right, that's it.
Thanks, Tim. Appreciate you staying connected. Paula, who's next?
I have William McCarville.
Welcome, Will.
Gosh, I always forget to unmute. Thanks for the opportunity to speak tonight. I want to speak to the gravel pit development, specifically the city's sleds ordinance. So there's a couple key sections of sleds. 19.72.110B says, prior to consideration of any request for rezoning, preliminary plat approval, conditional use approval, and/or site plan approval of property, the required geologic hazard reports shall be submitted to the city for review. I believe the current process is not following sleds as geological hazards reports continue to be submitted. The Planning Commission last year voted to recommend PDD2 approval by the city government, even though sensitive lands issues have not been fully evaluated and mitigated for phase 1. The simple language of sleds does not consider phasing. All has to be evaluated prior to approval, yet the PDD2 has 7 phases. And so I believe the Planning Commission recommendation was premature. I think the city attorney should confirm what the sleds ordinance says prior to the city approval of PDD2. In addition, the city council needs to confirm development review committee recommendations per sleds. This is different than the regular development review committee. Another piece of sleds, 19.72.150. In cases of conflict between this chapter and the provisions of existing zoning classifications, building code, subdivision ordinance, or any other ordinance of the city applicable law, the most restrictive provisions shall apply. I believe that less restrictive provisions are being applied. In conclusion, I ask that the city follow its sleds ordinance. Thank you.
Thank you, Will. I appreciate that. And just a reminder for our audience too, when public comments made, we won't get into a dialogue, but I think every comment, Stephanie, if it's a question like some that Will's made up, deserve a specific response. So we'll get back to you formally on those.
Mayor, may I also mention something?
Sure.
We citizen comment, and this is great to get the comments. We do have 2 public comment periods that are specific to applications. One will be the gravel pit development. That will be coming up here shortly. And then also the tentative budget. So yep, if people want to wait and comment on those specific items, they can do that then as well.
Good clarification. That's very timely. Thank you. Paula, someone else, or maybe someone would like to comment twice. Yeah.
Austin Spencer.
Welcome, Austin.
Hello, can you guys hear me?
We can hear you.
Perfect. So I wanted to get on it in regards to the short-term rentals. I'm one of the constituents who has been creating a wealth of issues in the community, in regards to short-term rentals. And I've been working, really closely with code enforcement, and I want to commend them. Just as far as the process goes, we're no longer running our short-term rental. So I want to vocalize that to the people listening and just let them know that, the code enforcement process does work. So, I've heard word that, my neighbors are suing Cottonwood Heights in regards to that, and that's something that I think is absolutely ridiculous. So I don't know if that's all hearsay. I do want to come on and in support of short-term rentals and the opposition. I think that I am not alone in this standpoint. There's actually a large group of people who also agree with me, but they fear to speak up because the essence of speaking up will be essentially outing themselves as operating something that is currently illegal according to the current code. And so I think that it's big that, and this is my opinion, is that Airbnb has transformed the way that people travel. I think in some aspects it's here to stay. You can't go to a hotel and have people, have a family of 5 and cook a meal, or travel with a family of 10. You have to be in separate rooms. So my input is that Airbnb is here to stay for at least in some form or fashion. And I think that Cottonwood Heights would be doing a disservice by ignoring the fact that it's extremely prevalent in our community currently, and by turning and looking the other way and saying it's restricted, and then handling it only on a complaint basis, I think we're all doing ourselves a disservice. As a member of Cottonwood Heights, I personally don't want parties. I don't want parking violations. I think that we're on the side of all of our neighbors. But I do think there's a lot of positivity that can come from it. And I just wanted to vocalize that, just to know that there are other people that feel on the opposition there. And I think that those people are somewhat suppressed. So outside of that, we owned a property in Kissimmee, Florida, and I know I'm coming short here on my time, so I'll wrap up here in a second. We owned a property in Kissimmee, Florida, and they do a lot of short-term rentals there. And I actually had a pretty close relationship with the county tax assessor there. And because Kissimmee, Florida has leaned into the short-term rentals, their city has recognized a significant amount in tax revenue. There's a permit process that people have to go through, meaning that there's oversight. There's people aren't running these short-term rentals illegally. They're being put through a process, and if they don't follow these, it's similar to a conditional use permit. The city issues a conditional use permit, and that's under the guise that it can be, taken away if they're not following the standards. I think currently, as it is, the city's looking the other way, and they don't have enforcement is not realistic. We have 2 code enforcement officers. People are going to continue to run these units, and I think the city would be better off. And it doesn't need to be immediately, but I think by looking the other way, we're avoiding a problem that is going to inevitably, come to a head in the next 3 to 5 years, because Airbnb has transformed the way people travel. And I think that we're doing ourselves a disservice as a city by looking the other way versus trying to transform and adapt to what is the proper way that we can address this and keep our community the way that we love it. So that's all. Sorry if that was a little bit long. I appreciate the opportunity to share, though.
All right. Thank you, Austin. Appreciate your taking time to communicate with us. Paula, who's next?
I have Jack Bloom.
Jack, welcome.
Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to speak tonight. My name is Jack Bloom, and I'm a licensed professional geologist, both here in Utah and California. And I wanted to speak about the gravel pit project. I've done a variety of work as a geologist. I performed geologic hazard investigations similar to that for the gravel pit project. I've also worked at open pit mines, monitoring pit walls for landslides and rock falls. In these roles, my focus has always been on minimizing hazards and keeping people safe. I've been following this project since 2018. In November 2019, I gave a PowerPoint presentation to several city officials about my concerns about this project. I've read the original geologic and geotechnical reports and the more recent follow-up reports. as well as the reviews to those reports. My takeaway is that the geologic hazards at this site pose too great a risk for a development that consists of the proposed multiple high-rise buildings. So why is this site a concern for me? Well, it's because it will be ground zero during a major earthquake, and it has multiple geologic hazards. So what are these hazards? I'd like to go through them just briefly for you and give you my take on them. So ground rupture is the first hazard. This site sits directly on the Wasatch Fault. Trench work at the gravel pit site revealed 6 faults, each of which ruptured the ground surface in the past during major earthquakes. This makes this site very hazardous for building construction. Rupture of these faults is a given during a major earthquake. The proposed buildings are being placed between these faults with setbacks of only 20 to 46 feet from the faults. Think about this. Multi-story buildings are being placed close to faults that will generate a 7.0 magnitude earthquake at some point. Additionally, there's a reasonable probability that the ground will rupture in new locations during this major earthquake. These new ruptures are likely to be beneath the proposed buildings, thus defeating their placement between the faults. Ground shaking is a second hazard. Shaking during an earthquake is most intense in 2 areas: the epicenter of the earthquake and where the ground surface ruptures. Placing these buildings where the ground has ruptured means they will be subject to the most intense ground shaking. Additionally, the Magna earthquake revealed the Wasatch Fault is not as deep in the subsurface as was previously thought. This means ground shaking in the big one will be greater than previously modeled. I've had discussions with 3 structural engineers and a seismologist, all of whom say the seismic design parameters in the geologic and the geotechnical reports are inadequate for this site. Instead, there needs to be a site-specific ground motion study for determining proper seismic parameters for building construction. Ground tilting is the third hazard. There's evidence the ground surface tilted during past earthquakes at this location. This poses a risk to building structures. Tilting could lead to building collapse. How much tilting could occur at this site has not been documented. Buried landslides are the fourth hazard. 2 old landslides were identified during the trenching study. Tim Thompson mentioned one that was subject to liquefaction in the past, but not a risk today. That's probably true. However, the deeper landslide has a risk of reactivating during an earthquake. In my opinion, its extent has not been fully determined, and its orientation has not been properly modeled for slope stability analysis. Finally,
Jack, you need to try and wrap up in about 30 seconds. We're well over the 3 minutes to be consistent. And you can comment again during gravel pit. Yeah.
okay, I thought I was being given 5 minutes. I'm sorry.
Well, no, well, go ahead, wrap up. Yeah.
Anyway, the last hazard is this debris flow. And as Tally mentioned, there was one in 1982 at the gravel pit, and it caused $5.5 million in damage in today's dollars. So overall, I believe the risk from these hazards exceeds any mitigation that could be done for them. It's critical to remember that this site will be ground zero during the coming major earthquake in the Salt Lake Valley. And if you're interested, I'd be willing to meet with you, council members and mayor, to provide further details on this. And thank you again for the opportunity to speak.
Thank you, Jack. Appreciate your time and energy on this subject. Paula, who's next?
Paula, you might be on mute.
Matt Siemens. Oh, yes. I'm so sorry. I didn't hear my name called. Hello, everyone.
Welcome, Matt.
I just wanted real quick, I'm the new general manager for the new courtyard that just opened up on Friday.
Aha.
And so just wanted to voice my opinion as a hotel operator. I understand what the gentleman was just saying a little bit ago about Airbnb and how they do have a purpose and a place for travelers that need that kind of a space and accommodation. However, as long as it's done the right way, as long as they're done legally in accordance with the laws and they're paying taxes and doing all the things they're supposed to be doing to follow the ordinances and the laws. So obviously some of it eats into our hotel revenues. So we want it to be done correctly and legally. So we're definitely in support of that. And I just wanted to voice our support for that as well.
Thank you, Matt. Appreciate your comment. So welcome to Cottonwood Heights. And we agree with, as long as it's done legally and where it's authorized by ordinance, it's fine. Yeah. All right. Paula, who's next?
Yes, sir. I have Heather McCall.
Welcome, Heather.
Hello. Okay, so I am wanting to talk about the topic of short-term rentals as well. So I live in the neighborhood on Russell Park. So I live directly next door to Austin. So anyway, we've gotten to know them a little bit, and I think they're really nice neighbors. And I just have to respectfully disagree with Austin on that having short-term rentals in neighborhoods is it's dangerous. It's not. I don't think we should welcome it. I don't feel like we should have basically hotels next door in our R1 neighborhoods. So there's just a couple of safety concerns with that. Just as a neighbor, typically it can lead to increased theft in the neighborhood. Unknown tenants with unknown history, such as sex offenders, in short term and in and out. We don't know who's there and what their purpose is. And the parties are, there hasn't been a lot of noise, particularly with this one, but the parties are second compared to the safety concerns. Multiple people in the house, you're talking 10 extra people in a 2-bedroom basement apartment. You're taxing the sewer system, the utilities in the area, the water usage. You have higher traffic activity, more cars parked on the street, prohibiting snowplows, creating unsafe crossing for streets for children, the dilapidation of the home, unsafe for renters, as well as for emergency situations such as rescue or emergency services. Paramedics are unable to get in and out if there's an emergency, violation with ADA laws. I work with a lot of commercial design in commercial spaces as well as residential design. And frankly, the laws need to be followed, and the ordinances are there for a reason, for the health, safety, and welfare of the public. And that it needs to be followed. And there's a reason you need to get permits and a reason we need to have these ordinances for the safety of all of us. Thank you for giving us the time tonight. I appreciate it. And thanks for all of your support.
Yep. Appreciate you calling in tonight. Paula, who's next?
Ellen Byro.
Ellen, welcome.
Thank you so much. Good evening to all the city council, mayor. I'd like to comment on the North Gravel Pit project. From my understanding and visiting with Laurie Noda, who sat on the Salt Lake City Planning Commission and had to take up a similar challenge of giving a yay or nay vote to a residential structure This was a few years ago that was being proposed in Salt Lake City, and also with my neighbor Will McCarville and others who have geological expertise. My understanding is that it is statistically proven that most earthquakes in our region occur in the pre-dawn hours. And so I believe that the council really needs to take a really hard look at the idea of a condo building, especially a several-story high residential building containing innumerable men, women, and children being built along a fault line. Strict enforcement of sleds is gravely important. I saw the other day that the City Planning Commission had it on its agenda to amend sleds. And I am not certain exactly what content was going there, but I am very opposed to any amendment that weakens sleds. I think that ordinances should not be bent to meet the needs or desires of developers. Cottonwood Heights residents depend on the City Council and the Planning Commission for both our welfare and the welfare of future residents. And I think we need to always make sure that our priority is placed on zoning, ordinance, and procedures that protect health and safety of residents well before putting such an emphasis on economic development. Thank you so much for the time.
Thank you, Ellen. Appreciate you calling in again. Paula, who's next?
Yes, Mayor. Next, we have Angela B.
Angela, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for giving us the opportunity to speak. I would also like to address the short-term rental issue. I did submit some questions, so I'm not going to reiterate those as much as I'm going to follow up to some of what was spoken about in the previous meeting. As to the short-term rental versus the hotels, the hotels are all playing by the rules. They have to follow certain codes and ordinances, pay taxes. They're under strict guidelines of sanitation and things of that nature, especially with COVID being an issue. These private rentals for short term are not. We don't know what kind of cleanliness they have or cleaning process, which increases the likelihood of spread of COVID and other such illnesses in the community. Excuse me. So I do have an issue with that. Also, I also disagree with Mr. Spencer because of the fact that although he did cease renting short-term the Russell Park home, the Wasatch Management Company that he works for, in fact, deterred me to an additional property within Cottonwood Heights that they're willing to rent out short-term. So skirting the process is a problem. And in the code, it does read that if it is a corporation, the fee may be increased to $5,000. And I would question if this is in fact being placed on them for Wasatch Management. Are you only citing the homeowner, or are you citing additionally the management company, as they are also a guilty party in it, as well as each day that the violation occurs? Are the compliance officers going out to see and recite additional days if the renter is still in the home more than that day that they were cited? I do not want to see a home that I paid for to be in a nice, quiet residential R1 neighborhood turned into a revolving door of tenants that we know nothing about. I enjoy the quiet community that I live in, and I think that the Wasatch Management Company and other owners should respect that as well. So thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you, Angela, for calling in. I think your involvement is always important to us to hear from those who were impacted most. Paula, who's next?
We have Kate Harrison.
Kate, welcome.
Hi, I also have a comment and a question about the short-term rentals. My comment is, I don't believe that in a single-family neighborhood we should be forced to live next to an Airbnb when Cottonwood Heights has already carved out legal places where Airbnbs can legally be. So that's my comment. And then I guess my question is for, I think Chief Russo. Can you explain in further detail the disconnect from the ordinance that specifies the fines and penalties and how it's getting disconnected to the court system?
Kate, we appreciate your question. We won't do it during citizen comments. That's our policy, but we will have our code enforcement or Chief Russo contact you personally after the meeting, probably tomorrow, and share that with you. I hope you understand, but we will follow through with you and get you the answer to that question.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you. Hope you, Robbie, you'll follow through with her. Yeah. Okay, Paula, who's next?
Next, I have Dennis Iverson. Oh, wait, it dropped. Wait just a second. He's muted, but there he goes.
Welcome, Dennis. Go
Thank
ahead.
you. I appreciate the opportunity. I would like to address a couple of things that were broached just a little bit. It seems as though that the Achilles heel of all of this enforcement may be what the previous caller, Catherine, mentioned, and that is the penalties that are theoretically can be applied are not being applied. And you had mentioned, and I made a note on this in the work meeting, that the prosecutor, is his first or last name Tucker?
Last name, yeah.
Last name.
First name, I guess. Yeah.
All right, it could be either.
It's Tucker Hansen.
All right. Well, it seems to be that perhaps you, Chief Russo, could, and any others, could make a fact that the people of Cottonwood Heights need to have strict enforcement by fines and penalties that affect these people. As it was mentioned earlier, a $250 fine or something, my gosh, they get that in one night. That's just, as someone said, just the cost of doing business. It needs to be significantly painful, and the judge needs to recognize the laws, ordinances that are in our city have to be enforced, and a penalty to discourage that. As was recently mentioned, there is a place for Airbnbs and rentals in Cottonwood Heights. It just doesn't have to be R1 neighborhoods. And the problem with Mr. Spencer is that, yes, he said that he's not going to do it in this area of Cottonwood Heights, but he's got other areas where he is managing illegal R1 Airbnbs. And so they just kind of deflect off, and the fact that he illegally started it in the first place as a man who knows what the codes are in Cottonwood Heights, and to simply flaunt them and not do anything until he's actually faces enforcement is an example of what's happening. And why would people go ahead and flaunt it if they have a penalty that they have to face? So I hope that there is some effort on Cottonwood Heights officials to make the prosecutor do a better job of taking the concerns to the judge and enforcing stricter penalties and fines. So I appreciate the opportunity to talk, and thank you.
Thank you, Dennis. We appreciate those comments. And again, stay tuned, because staff will be bringing back some recommendations, and hopefully you can comment on those recommendations when they're presented to us soon. Paula, who's next?
I have Jason Earhart.
Jason, welcome.
Thank you, Mayor. Again, I'm Jason Earhart, and I'd like to talk about short-term rentals. I also must disagree with Austin, and I'm going to tell you a quick story, and then I have a couple of comments at the end of my story. So we actually have a neighbor that has one of these short-term rentals. They're actually not an Airbnb, they're a VRBO. But my comments and thoughts are about both of them because they have very similar business models. Initially, we had ignored this house because we were unaware that there was an ordinance around short-term rentals. Several years of poor renter behavior really wore on us, and it included things like a parking during major snow events on the street, which actually restricted our street to a single lane. And we live on a very steep section of Kings Hill. And this actually turned the entire street into a skating park for the vehicles. And I know several vehicles that suffered damage as a consequence of people parking on the street during snow events, which is, of course, against other ordinances within the city. Other things included a fire pit. We live right up against the interface of the National Forest Service land, and having a fire pit running out in their yard like that just made everybody very nervous about what might happen to us. And the whole thing got brought to a head last summer when one evening we heard a lot of commotion out in front of our yard, and we came outside and there were cars parked on both sides of the street for as far as one could see. And there was a party going on at this VRBO-based house, and it was a college party, and we had people standing in our lawn. We had neighbors that were just absolutely stunned. Thank goodness Chief Russo had all of his enforcers out and helping to diffuse this before it got really out of hand. But this brought the whole thing to a head. And while I discussed it with one of our local city council members, I was made aware that there was a short-term lease ordinance in town. I had been unaware of that up until then. Now I just found out, thank you. Now I just found out from another neighbor that she is also planning on listing her house on Airbnb. So to my comments, we really need to make sure that we follow one of the four recommendations that were in the presentation in the working session. We need to increase the knowledge of the 30-day or short-term rentals. And I was really pleased to see that. And beyond that, both the Airbnb and the VRBO websites stated that they follow local ordinances with regard to this. And I think we need to speak with those folks and make sure that they're enforcing that. There should be no Airbnb or VRBO listings for Cottonwood Heights on these, and they should actually own up to what they claim that they will do. Thank you very much for your time. You all have a lovely evening.
Thank you, Jason. Appreciate those comments, and we'll add that to the discussion and use that information as we modify our ordinance and our code enforcement based upon all the comments. So, Paula, who's next?
I have Tom Adams.
Welcome, Tom.
Thank you, Mayor. Thanks to everybody for all your time and your service. I appreciate that. For those of you that know me, I've spent a lot of time working with the governor's office and the Office of Outdoor Recreation. And
That's right.
For better or for worse, we're a tourism-based economy in a lot of places in Utah. Cottonwood Heights, in reality, is not that much different than a Moab or a Springdale or a Park City, as we see 5 million tourists a year coming into our beautiful canyons here to ski. With that comes a lot of pros and a lot of cons, and we have lots of people moving in. If anybody was to look at realtor.com and filter on houses that are pending, there's not very many houses available here right now. In addition, I'd like to echo the fact that I actually do agree with Austin in the fact that Airbnb has changed the world, and we've seen that in our legislative sessions here in Utah. It's changed so many communities here in Utah, and I bring up Springdale and I bring up Moab because they have lots of major problems that we could face if not for the great management of our city that we've had really since the city began and before that. So I would tie some of this back to the comments that were made a little bit earlier in the prior meeting about the code. The code was very clear a decade ago, I guess, when it was written, speaking to the dating around short term. It was clear back then what the community wanted. I think it's very clear now what the community wants, especially in those R1 neighborhoods. I'd encourage the council to look at some of those codes, updating some of the languages. And the one question I would ask following up the last meeting is the statement on section 1.8.20 if a guilty party is a corporation, and truly, I'm not sure what the definition of a corporation is by that. Does it just mean a business? Because as an Airbnb renter myself in an area that's zoned for it, we follow those rules. I feel like we are being run by a corporation as we work through companies like Airbnb. They manage everything for us. The only thing we have to do is put furniture in a facility or a house and get it cleaned. Other than that, a corporation is running our business, and I would gladly take a $5,000 fine if I was violating the code. And so I would ask you guys to define corporation in that. And thank you for your time and hearing us all out today.
Thank you, Tom. Appreciate you joining us and sharing your thoughts. Paula, who's next?
I believe there's Jessica Chappelle wants to speak, so I'll give her permission.
Welcome, Jessica.
Hi, can you hear me?
We can hear you. Go ahead.
Hi, my name is Jessica Chappell. I am a structural engineer and a resident of Cottonwood Heights. And I was just calling in to comment about the gravel pit development. As a structural engineer, you know, we build all the time, all over the valley over faults, right? We know there's lots of faults here. But there is something special about the gravel pit development with the 4 fault surface rupture geology, right? We see the special faults that occur across that site. And so as part of that, the standard off-the-shelf seismic design forces don't really apply in these kinds of areas. And so I just didn't know what the city's policy is if they are going to require a site-specific, it's called a probabilistic seismic hazard analysis for that project. And then the other question that I had was about plan review and if there's a peer review of the structural design for a 10-story building. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Jessica. Appreciate those comments. And we'll probably maybe touch base with you again. Paula, someone else?
Joey Bouchon.
Welcome, Joe.
Hello, Mayor and council members. I appreciate all that you do for us and your service that you provide to our community. As one of the members here in a neighbor here in the Cottonwood Heights area with the short-term rental issue that we have, I think one of the things that I have seen is why we're partially in this issue right now is the enforcement problems that we're having, and I would like to encourage Chief Russo to see if there is something we could do to enforce this issue a little bit further. And, not having to play catch up here, as we know, there are well over 250 Airbnbs here in Cottonwood Heights, and probably even more than that. And we have some of them might be legal and doing as they should, but there are many that aren't. And I think if we sent a message to the ones that are not legal, that we would have a much, the message would go out throughout the community and it would be stopped. The other issue I had is my wife the other day wanted to say, she said, hey, why don't we just see what would be involved in getting chickens and having some chickens in our backyard. And one thing that became apparent to me is I needed to check with the ordinances and see if it was even, doable. And first of all, I had to find out to go down to the city and tell them that what I was going to do. Then I had to go build the chicken coop, have it made according to the specifications that the city requires. And then after that, have an ordinance enforcer come out and verify whether or not what I built was according to code. And I just find that so almost humorous that I had to do more work to have a chicken coop in my backyard than an Airbnb has to do to operate a business that we have no idea what is going on next door. And I hope the irony of all of this comes out that I do know what a chicken does. It's going to lay eggs. It's going to eat. But that's about it. But I don't know what happens next door with an Airbnb. And I hope that the council is able to act on this and that Chief Russo is able to enforce the the ordinances that we have in place. And I thank you for your time this evening and appreciate all that you do.
Thanks, Joe, and appreciate your analogy. Yeah. Paul, who's next?
Mayor, I don't have any raised hands at the moment. Oh, Austin Spencer keeps raising his hand, but I already told him there's another 2 public comment periods that he can speak at.
Yeah, and he's welcome to submit something to us or contact the city, but I appreciate his comments, and I think he was quite clear. And okay, we'll close citizen comment period. And again, appreciate, it looks like we had about 15 different comments. Some of those we take notes on and we'll be back in touch with. Others, I think, are just making clear their position, but we appreciate those comments. That's what about our form of government is about giving people an opportunity to communicate with us. So thank you. We're now going to move to a public comment period, and we have 2 items on public comment. First, if anyone in the audience would like to speak to the gravel pit development, and if you've already spoke during citizen comments, you're welcome to comment again, but we'd encourage you not to be redundant, but you're welcome to comment again. So public comment on gravel pit, we'll do that first. And Mike, do you want to introduce that at all?
Mayor, I don't have anything else to add. I think I've presented this multiple times and at last meeting's public comment, so I don't have anything else to share.
All right. Thank you. Just want to give you that opportunity. All right, Paula, anyone who would like to speak to the gravel pit development?
Yes, sir. Ken Gardner.
Ken, welcome.
Hi, Mayor Peterson, councilwomen and councilmen. Thank you so much for all you do. Tim Tingy, thanks for keeping time today. I want to speak on the gravel pit. I wanted to say I am concerned about seismic on what Jack Bloom said and Jessica Chappell. As a PE electrical engineer, we deal with seismic as well, related to bracing of mechanical electrical components within the building. And the city should have a very good deferred process to make sure that the bracing calculations are done correctly and that they're inspected correctly, whatever gets built there. Secondly, I mentioned the traffic last time. I've given it some more thought. The bottom line is a T intersection is much safer than a curved intersection. And, UDOT straightens these all over the state to become T's. And the reason is because you look left out of your driver's window for oncoming traffic. You look right out of the passenger window for oncoming traffic, and the traffic is predictable in a T. In a curve, you're actually looking diagonally at the edge of your blind spot between the front windshield and the side windshield. It leads to more accidents. The traffic engineers who are doing the study and doing the design should be able to give the city council a statistical analysis. Now, roundabouts are better, but to do a curved intersection, the only way that's going to be safe is to do a traffic semaphore. And that also sets up for the future traffic of the south part of the development when that gets bigger, because I have to ask the question, if realignment is reserved as an option in the future, who pays for that? And how many accidents are we going to have before it gets realigned 20 years from now? So my take is think seriously about this, because you're doing it to help Holiday City residents not stop at a stop sign or a stoplight for a few seconds. And a bad accident could just negate those few seconds of savings. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ken. Appreciate you calling in again. Paula, who's next?
I don't have anyone else. So. Oh, Eric Cran.
Welcome, Eric. Comments regarding the gravel pit.
Hello, hello neighbors. Hello, Mayor. Hey, here we are again talking about PDD, and apparently nothing can be done with notified ordinances being modified at the request of developers. Years ago, the council debated and voted to enact these laws to safeguard the safety, health, and general welfare. It might be understandable if an occasional hiccup needs correcting, but this being the second application, and I have lost count of how many staff will ask for changes to be made, I can't help but wonder if this code is poorly written. Shouldn't you just follow on Sandy City's example and call on a 6-month moratorium on all PDD applications and have staff collect their thoughts and have them present a new PDD process, which we can assume will remain stable? If this is impossible, then you probably should consider scraping the PDD altogether and just create an administrative zoning that streamlines and brings some stability to the process for all parties' peace of mind. The owners of the property, the developers, staff, you, the council, and the public in general. It's getting a little bit, to the point where we got to start thinking, do we know what we're doing? Frankly, we have to change the map of the PDD zone. We need to change the zone density. We need to change the affordability. We need to clarify if it's, adult housing or affordable housing. We need to clarify, how the sensitive lands is being produced, traffic, blah, 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 parking. At some point, we need to start clarifying these things and have a clear idea of what we're trying to do and set goals. And that's my comment. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Eric. Appreciate your comment. Paula, who's next?
I don't have anyone else.
All right, we'll close the public comment period regarding the gravel pit development and move to public comment regarding our proposed fiscal year 2021-2022 adoption of our tentative budget. Again, emphasize this is tentative. Scott, do you want to introduce that quickly?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. Let me share something quickly. So what I'm sharing is the write-up on the budget. I'm not going to go through it in total detail, but in summary, we're projecting in our general fund to end the current year that we're in, that ends in June, at 6 million, almost 300,000 of fund balance. At that level, that would give us about $4,400,000 available for appropriation in our new budget year. Property taxes will be generated and told to us what they will be from the state auditor or the county auditor. That will come in early June. Sales tax revenues is one area where we have the biggest adjustment. We'd currently budgeted $5,750,000. We're going to collect closer to 7 million during the current year. That was due to the COVID-19 pandemic and not understanding how we were going to be impacted. We're going to budget 7.2 million. So that alone is a $1,450,000 increase, but it does follow in line going up from what we received in 2019, 2020. The other item that changed in here is that in our Class C roads, we are projecting about a $30,000 increase to what we had budgeted in our current year budget. That falls closer along with what we're seeing to receive in the current year. The total is that we would see $1,530,000 of more revenue from the current adopted budget, with $1,450,000 of that being sales tax. And then just a note, we don't have any American Recovery Act funds in the budget. Those would be handled on an adjustment basis going into the future with thorough discussions with the council at that time. Items in expenses that we have is we've included the other $304,000 for the market adjustment that was put in place in January. We've included a COLA adjustment for 1.4%, which matches the national CPI. We have a merit increase
that matches our pay structure at an average of a 3.62% change for those who are eligible for that merit increase that aren't topped out. The other items are relatively small. Overall, all compensation related items are $607,000 that are included in the budget. Moving on, we have elections. So we've added in 45,000 to cover elections for this current year, municipal elections. The larger items, we've included 30,000 to help cover any litigation costs that may not be covered by the trust. We have 2,500 that we've included for the Forbush Cemetery. Added 5,000 back for the Wasatch, Central Wasatch Commission. We added 66,000 back to fund Butlerville Days. We took that out in our prior year budget. Moving down here in our House Bill 411, we've added, in order to be eligible still to participate in the Renewable Energy Act, we've added 35,000 for that. Excuse me. In police, we have a VEC versus term increase of 73,000, and that's due to a new allocation method used there. We have 32,000 in to help control some traffic issues related to snow days and the ski traffic that comes through. We also have, I think I forgot to emphasize this last time too, we also added 7,500 for diversity and de-escalation training. Fire, we currently have a placeholder of $161,000. We think that's going to actually be closer to this 117,000, but that will get finalized in the next week or so. And when we get that, we'll place that in there, and that will result in a little bit of a savings. In Public Works, we have added a stormwater FTE that will be funded by stormwater funds and transferred to the stormwater fund. We're recommending a pickup truck replacement. And then another item is to update our Public Works building options and cost, including phasing and other related items that we need to know. And then we're recommending a stormwater fund that would shift 665,000. That's 600,000 from the base general fund plus 65 for the extra FTE that we talked about just up above. So overall, our expenses would be $18 million. It would leave us with, let's see, let me move down to transfers. Sorry, I almost skipped the transfers. $1,832,000 for Public Works capital projects. Debt service, just under $1,800,000 going into debt service to cover the land debt, land and building debt, the police vehicle debt, and then the Public Works vehicle debt. Then the new one is $193,000 to go to the stormwater fund. So that's a difference of removing $600,000 of expense and incurring another just under $200,000. So it's a $400,000 difference in that expense in the general fund. So that would leave us with about $5.5 million of ending fund balance, which would be about $3,691,000 available for appropriation at the end of the year. In our capital improvements fund, we're starting the year with 87,000 of available fund balance, transferring in 1.8 million from the general fund. There's a transfer in from the CDRA fund of 395,000 for projects that were completed in those areas in prior years. There is going to be about 400,000 in annual revenue that will come in that's related to quarter of the quarter, but we need to get details on when that's going to start and kind of how that's going to come in for us. But when we get that, we'll adjust this in, hopefully before we adopt our final budget in June. And then we're also predicting 350,000 in grant revenue for the solar project here at City Hall, but that will be adjusted when we get that information more clear. The expenditures are 2.1 million for public works items, so just a little over 2 million for street type items. And then 100,000 for sidewalk project on 2700 East. No stormwater projects because that's going to be in the stormwater fund. Well, I call this trails and parks project, 61,000 to finish the Ferguson Canyon Park project. And that now maybe we'll need the expense, but we'll also, we just found out today, we'll receive about 150,000 of a grant to be able to offset some of those costs that we'll need to incorporate into this budget before we finalize it. So that will kind of take care of this down here where we had a little bit of a shortfall we needed to address. In our stormwater fund, this is based off of $7.50 per month per ERU. It would generate $1,406,000 of revenue. The transfer in of 193,000 would bring that up to $1,600,000 of available revenues. Expenditures are 600,000 of our base general fund expenditures, which is about 490,000 in salary and 110,000 in benefits. In addition, it's 65,000 for the new stormwater operations FTE, and then 409,000 of these items outlined right here, which is stormwater engineering cost, 75,000 for flushing out the stormwater manholes and inlets, 225,000 for raising buried storm drain manholes, and 101,000 for the Timberline Prospector and Quicksilver waterway replacement. So that would leave in here about 525,000 for additional future projects and or to be used as we potentially enter into any debt service that we may want to do for bonding. The CDRA fund, we talked about this before, 395,000 would be transferred out for projects that were done in the former areas, project areas that are complete. We currently have 204,000 that in tax increment from when it was falsely triggered earlier on. So going into our revenues, we would estimate about 10,000 in interest revenue, about 470,000 or so in property taxes, and this will be adjusted as we get the true number in about March or so. And then again, we would have our expenditures about 10,000 in miscellaneous, and then 674,000 in total costs. And this 674 is made up of the 204 in revenues already received in prior year, plus the 469,000 received and predicted to be received in this year. So those items would be dispersed based on the table that was created when this project was put in place. And again, the transfer out of the 395 is right there. So this would leave $1,365,000 in this fund that is directly related to the Fort Union and Cottonwood Corporate Center redevelopment areas. The debt service fund, we have expenses again related to police, public works, and the building. And then we have the transfer in to cover those expenditures. We have a $374,000 or $374 fund balance that we're going to push to zero at the end of that year because we don't need to have a fund balance in there. So there are a couple items that we need to take care of. Oh, I forgot to mention in our up above, we do have in our capital projects fund, I just have omitted writing it up in here. I discovered just shortly before this meeting, 516,000 for solar at City Hall, and then 35,000 for bike lanes. We also have those projects included, but I did not include them here on the narrative that I wrote up. Running down, so the items that still need to be addressed is we need to clarify on the 400,000 that's related to the additional quarter of the quarter funds and timing of when that money is going to come in and how much is going to impact the current year or this budget that's being proposed. There's 117,000 in general fund ending balance, and that's going to change upward a little bit. That we'll need to reallocate to be in compliance with our 25% maximum fund balance on hand. This is probably taken care of with information that we got today on that grant. UFA contract will be adjusted. Probably this is a typo. It won't save us 117,000. It will save us 43,000 some odd dollars. 43,273 probably. We'll get that final number and get that in. And then our final certified property tax rate and the property tax revenue will be available by or around the 10th of June. Sometimes it's the 8th of June, but somewhere in that time frame. But outside of that, this is pretty much complete and ready to go. There are just those couple of items that we need to take care of.
Scott, where can the public get a copy of the detailed budget for the review during this period?
So Lindsay Wilcox will be putting that on our website and putting links to it on our other social media sites so that everybody can find that. She'll do that tomorrow morning.
All right. Thank you, Scott. Tim, any comments with the budget?
Oh, just two things real quick. I do have two things real quickly. One, we went through this process. We've been going through it since January. The compensation and budget committees have been working, which has included council members. We're recommending adoption of the tentative budget. There will be more discussion on June 1st or May 18th and possibly June 1st in the work sessions. We'll get additional input through public comment on June 1st and then look at adoption on June 15th. So this is really the beginning of that public input process, which is very important as part of the budget, but we're recommending approval of the tentative budget at this time.
Thank you, Tim. Thank you, Scott. And thank you, council members, for your involvement in the committees. And again, this is tentative. I know that there'll still be many adjustments going forward before the adoption in June. This now is the public comment period on the proposed fiscal year budget for 2021-2022. Paul, anyone who'd like to comment on this tentative budget?
Yes, sir. Ken Gardner.
Ken, welcome again.
Hi, guys. Thank you. Scott, may the 4th be with you. I love your background. Thank you guys for the diligent work on the budget. I participated a couple of times listening in where you guys were talking about the budget, and it looks like you guys do generally a very good job at tracking money, and it's not an easy thing. Thank you for funding diversity and de-escalation of the police training. I think that's incredibly important. It's something we've been talking about for quite a while now, and I highly support that as one of the police reform issues that should be addressed. And that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Ken. Appreciate your comment. Paul, is someone else would like to speak to the budget?
Yes, sir. Tim Hallback.
Tim, welcome back.
Yeah, one quick comment. Earlier, was it today or in the newsletter, you'd announced that we are going to do the Butlerville Days this year, but we're not going to be paying the guys that do the rides and the bouncy houses and that kind of thing. But that looks like that amount is still in the tentative budget. Could we change that before we say, yes, it's approved tentatively?
Well, yeah, I think we'll look at that and talk in the final budget, but I think actually the carnival actually generates more money than we expend. So I'm not sure it's a savings not having it. Scott?
It was quite a revenue source last year. It's making the budget quite tight to not have that attraction.
Yeah. But anyway, appreciate that comment. And as we review the budget before finalization, we'll look at that closely again. But thank you for the comment.
Cool.
Paula, anyone else?
No, Mayor, I have no one else.
All right. We'll close the public comment period on proposed budget for fiscal year 2021-2022. And we'll now move to our action items on the agenda. The first item is consideration of resolution 2021-17, adopting a tentative budget for the period of 1 July 2021 through 30 June 2022, providing for public inspection of such budget, establishing the time and place of a public hearing to consider adoption of such budget, and providing for a newspaper publication of such public hearing. Any comments or questions on that resolution?
No, the state law requires that we adopt it at our first meeting in May. We are at our first meeting in May, so I would move that we approve the tentative budget for the 2021-2022 fiscal year.
Okay, it's been approved, been recommended for approval by Councilor Bracken. Do I have a second?
Second that.
Okay, it's been moved by Councilor Bracken, second by Councilor Bruce. Any final comments, questions? Here none, I call for the vote. Councilmember Peterson,
Yes.
Councilmember Michael,
Yes.
Councilmember Bruce,
Yes.
Councilmember Bracken,
Yes.
and I will vote yes. The next item, which is 5.2, is Resolution 2021-18, approving an agreement with Malin Pearson for the public artwork as part of our Arts Council. Something we talked about in detail in our previous meetings, but it's a beautiful piece, and I think we'll be very sensitive to Mr. Halbeck's concerns as far as keeping it safe and not vandalized, but we'll add to our pleasure out here in the plaza. Any comments or questions regarding this agreement?
Mayor, I think it's going to add to the atmosphere. I think that obviously it's in the preliminary stages as far as what it will look like. I think I've seen some similar pieces that the artist has done. I think it's going to be a great addition, and I think all of the concerns that we all have been addressed, and I look forward to it.
Is that a motion?
Yes, I move that we approve.
It's been moved by Councilor Peterson. Do we have a second?
I'll second that.
The second by Councilmember Bruce. Any further comments or discussion?
I would just give kudos to the Historic Committee for working with the Arts Council and their collaboration. It's been really nice and rewarding.
Agreed. All right, I'll call for the vote. Councilmember Bracken,
Yes.
Councilmember Bruce,
Yes.
Councilmember Peterson,
Yes.
Councilmember Michael,
Yes.
and I will vote yes. The next item is Resolution 2021-19, approving agreement with Modern Display Incorporated for design and construction of a parade float that we've discussed. This float will be kind of repurposed over the next 3 years with product that's, as Mr. Bracken has mentioned, has been used over and over again. But anyway, any final comments, questions regarding this resolution? Hearing none, I'd entertain a motion for approval.
Move that we approve resolution 2021-19.
It's been moved by Councilmember Bracken. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second by Councilmember Bruce. Any further comments, questions? Hearing none, we'll call for the vote. Councilmember Michael,
Yes.
Councilmember Bracken,
Yes.
Councilmember Peterson,
Yes.
Councilmember Bruce,
Yes.
and I will vote yes. The last item, which is 5.4, is a consideration for resolution 2021-20, approving an interlocal agreement with Salt Lake County for municipal election services. Paula, do you want to take just a minute and introduce that
Yes, sir. So this is an agreement with Salt Lake County to run our services. They provide several quotes for depending on what type of election we want to run. If it's a traditional election, it's about $20,000 more than a regular RC ranked choice voting election. So the savings, if the council decided to vote for ranked choice vote election, then that some of that money could be used towards education on ranked choice voting. I'm not sure if the council has any questions, or I can add to anything.
No, thank you, Paul. I know we had a lot of discussion. I'd like to give the council an opportunity to ask any questions or have any comments regarding this resolution. Again, we need to decide in the resolution if we are proceeding and supporting ranked choice voting, and if so, are we supporting it with or without a primary? Is that right, Tim?
Yes, so approval of the resolution, which is the agreement, and then giving direction on which form of election you want to move forward on.
Right, right.
I think one of the advantages of ranked choice is eliminating the primary. It's a tremendous savings in time and energy for the candidate, as well as expense for the city. And that ranking allows individuals to feel like their second and third and fourth candidates still matter. So I think it's a win-win.
I agree.
Mayor, I may have got a couple of minutes, if you'll give me a couple of minutes, I do have a couple of comments on ranked choice voting. I'd like to answer some questions that have been asked to me.
Sure.
And just have them on the record. Some of the answers haven't been easy to find. I think you realize that. I communicated some of them to you while we were in St. George.
Yep.
One of the more prevalent concerns about ranked choice voting is that it's too complicated and voters won't understand. It's clear from the vast majority of research that this is incorrect. People get it. Anecdotal evidence abounds, but peer-reviewed research also backs up the notion that voters are not too dumb to do it. In one mayoral election in Santa Fe in 2018, 61% of the voters successfully ranked all 5 candidates, and only 11% of the voters opted to choose only one. 94% of those same voters said they were very satisfied with the exit exit polling. They were pleased with the process. These numbers are not unusual, and they are backed up by other exit polls from multiple locations in multiple elections over multiple years across the country. Ballot errors do occur, but at no greater rate than in conventional voting methods. In 106 single winner races like we run here in Cottonwood Heights, with over 5 million ballots cast, the most common reason for an inactive ballot was voluntary abstention, where a voter just simply did not choose to vote for more than 1, 2, or 3 voters or candidates. The next most common error was a ranking limit. Some areas say you can only rank 3. That limit is not in the case in Salt Lake County. You can do up to 10, which is usually a lot more than what you have of candidates. After that, there was a 0.9% of the ballots that were inactive due to voter error, where they voted for somebody as first choice twice or something like that. There were some concerns expressed about, with all these votes floating around, that perhaps people's 4th, 5th, 6th, or 7th choice preferences could impact the election results. In reality, this does not happen very much. For example, in the Santa Fe election, only 3% of the winners' final ballots had the candidate listed as 4th. I've done some analysis on what they give a winner a consensus ballot to find out how often that winner was ranked 1st, 2nd, or 3rd. In that particular case, the mayor won with a 97% of a consensus value, where most of the people on the ballots had ranked that person for 2nd or 3rd. in doing data on a lot of elections like that. 2-to-1, the winner had ranked in the top three 67% of the time or more. They also had a confidence score of 75% and greater in over a third of the races, which basically means that usually the first three choices are what's going to determine the winner of an election. Finally, I'd like to address some confusion about how RCV may affect election outcomes for third-party, minority, and potentially even female candidates. There's been a lot of stuff that's written up there, and as though it's some sort of panacea for election method shortcomings. Finding research that actually controlled for external variables to establish causation rather than just correlation was difficult, but not fruitless. In brief, what I found is that for single seat elections like our mayor's race and our city council's race, where there's one winner in a district, there's no real significant difference on using RCV or not. The winners come out the same. This makes sense, as RCV is basically allows you to do a primary and general election in one fell swoop on one ballot with only one mailing, for an instant runoff effect. It is true, however, for an at-large elections with multiple winners where you're electing 2 or 3 council members from a single district, like they do in Vineyard and Payson, which are 2 Utah cities that used this 2 years ago, that RCV does show positive results with a closer alignment of elected officials to overall demographics in the city. This also makes sense because if you figure you have 35% of the people supporting a specific demographic or candidate, they would be more likely to be elected after maybe the first or second seat is filled and the third one still has need of votes. It's also in this way that RCV has been shown to defeat potential gerrymandering by district in partisan races. Cottonwood Heights elections, however, are not partisan, so the argument about any third-party advantage becomes moot. We have single-seat district elections, and so there is no advantage or disadvantage to simply using RCV. And the process is easily understood by most people. I see the advantage of RCV in eliminating the cost for a primary election and potentially shortening the length of the campaign season. Voter turnout participation in a November election is higher than in August for primaries, even with our vote by mail. Higher vote turnout is a good thing. Eliminating a summertime primary works toward a more democratic process. While I personally would prefer the early filing dates for candidates with a primary involved, I understand the reasoning behind the legislature moving the date back to August. I felt 2 years ago that RCV would be put to good use in Cottonwood Heights, and I still feel that way. Better yet, this year, we will be joined by 20 other cities in Utah, at least that was the count as of this morning, as well as Salt Lake County cities, Salt Lake City, South Salt Lake, Sandy, Draper, Mill Creek, Bluffdale, and Riverton that have all opted to do ranked choice voting this year. Thank you.
Sure you don't have anything else?
I got a mouthful, but I've had a lot of questions. I had a meeting and I felt I needed to at least address that for some of the people.
No, Scott, I appreciate you taking the time because you obviously stated everything that we've talked about over the last couple of years and when we voted on this a couple of years ago. So I appreciate that detailed summary of concerns and questions and issues. But Christine, Doug, anyone else have comments regarding ranked choice voting?
I just have to commend Scott. He actually studied this so thoroughly that some of the experts were surprised at what he learned. It's some of the old school voters are a little bit nervous because when you get into the 3rd, 4th, and 5th votes going to the next vote, it does get a little bit interesting to those that need to study it. And it's not something that you sit down and study as a hobby. on your lounge chair. It is something that takes a lot of study, and I appreciate what Scott's done to kind of help us understand better exactly the process.
Thank you. Any other comments, questions? Before I call for motion, I just want to echo that 2 years ago as a council, we did call in some experts, became educated, took a position then that we felt this was a good way to go for our city. I compared a little bit to mail-in ballots years ago. There was concerns across the board about mail-in ballots, how successful that will be, what problems that will cause. And I think we've all found out that it's been a plus for the election process with higher voter turnout, more involvement. And I think that we're going to see that ranked choice voting is going to be the same. It's something that those who've implemented have had very little complaints, little opposition. It proves that there's a cost savings. The other thing I liked is it seems that campaigns are even more civil because you now need to not just campaign for the first place vote, you're campaigning to second and third place votes. And so I think there's greater voter engagement. So I think this is a good direction to reaffirm our position to do that, and administratively to do it without a primary. I, for one, and I get a lot of comments from constituents that they would like to not see so many signs throughout our city. Almost looks like graffiti, even though it's a formal graffiti. And so there's some pluses there as well. But again, I'm going to be supportive. With those comments, any final comments from anyone?
Mayor, the education process, if we can do that, use some of that time and money, just for those that do not understand it, because it is not something that usually seek out to learn something like what we're doing with ranked choice. And so I look forward to that, just to take any of the apprehension or misunderstanding that it might bring.
Good point. I think that's an excellent point, and I think that'll be a priority we'll have going forward, is that education process. And actually, I think there's some state funds, if we can attempt to acquire them, that facilitate that, and of course the money we've saved by not doing a primary. So I appreciate you bringing that point up. Okay, enough for discussion on that topic. I'd entertain a motion on that agenda item.
I'd move that we approve resolution 20-21 and give direction to staff to notify the appropriate authorities that we'll be doing a ranked choice voting election in November with no primary.
I'll second that.
It's been moved by Councilmember Bracken and seconded by Councilmember Bruce. Any further discussion?
Hopefully Shane will correct me if I didn't get all that right.
I saw Tim Tingy nod his head, so, and they got a thumbs up there, so very good.
That gives us the direction we need with that motion.
All right, any further comments, questions? Hearing none, I'll call for the vote. Councilmember Peterson.
Yes.
Councilmember Bracken.
Yes.
Councilmember Bruce.
Yes.
Councilmember Michael.
Yes.
And I will vote yes.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Paula, for your efforts on that as well. That's the only action items, other than we do have a consent calendar, which is approval of the City Council work session and CDRA meeting and business meeting minutes for March 2nd, and work session and business meeting minutes for April 20th, 2021. Entertain a motion to approve the consent calendar.
I move to approve, Mayor.
It's been moved by Councilmember Peterson. Do I have a second?
Second.
It's been seconded by Councilmember Michael. All in favor, please say aye.
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 And for
I'll
the-
abstain, Mayor, just since I was out of town.
Okay, for the record, we have ayes by 4 council members and an abstention from Councilmember Bruce. Thank you. Now entertain a motion to adjourn our business meeting, and we will reconvene in a closed session of a continuation of the work session. Is that right, Shane?
I think you would probably adjourn the business meeting and reconvene in work session, and then convene a closed session.
You want that as two separate motions?
But Shane, I won't be able to open the work session. So we need to to adjourn and go into a closed meeting in a work session.
Right. So we're adjourning the business meeting and opening the work session. So that would be the first motion. The second would be adjourn, or rather go from the work session into the closed session.
But I don't have a meeting. I don't have the ability to go back to the work session and then close it again into the closed session.
That's what I was saying.
Perhaps we can do that like we did last week. We'll just have that part of the work session on this same Zoom meeting. And then we will open the closed meeting there.
If it's closed, Paula, can you just send them a new invite potentially so that it's just the people who are supposed to be on there anyway?
Well, they have an invite for the closed meeting, but we need to make a motion to go into the work session, into a closed meeting in the work session, I believe.
Got it. Okay.
Well, I want to do what Shane tells me to do.
That's fine. We can do it as Paula suggested. That'll work as well.
All right. So I entertain a motion to close the business meeting tonight, and we'll reconvene the work session in a closed meeting.
So moved.
For the purpose of discussing personnel. It's been moved by Councilmember Bruce. All in favor, please say aye.
Need a second. That would, or we get a second.
Do we need a second on adjournment? I don't know. Yeah.
Well, you need it
for going into the closed session.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So the motion is to adjourn from the business meeting, reconvene into a closed session in our work session, and it's been motioned by Councilmember Bruce, and it's been seconded by Councilmember Bracken. All in favor, or well, I'll do a roll call. Councilmember Bracken?
Yes.
Councilmember Peterson?
Yes.
Councilmember Michael?
Yes.
Councilmember Bruce?
Yes.
And I will vote yes. Thank you for your patience, and we'll see you in the closed session.
8:39.